Hey folks, it's the last week to see Chris Russell's show. I'm gonna give you a little walkthrough. This one is a tiny little sweet piece where the paint is hanging off the edge of the canvas. And this is something he does with some of his smaller pieces, and some of these he actually even works on when he's bike packing and brings his easel and paints and everything with him in the wilderness. I think this one was done in the studio, but it's kind of in the same style as some of those pieces. So this show is called Afterlife, and the show is basically a metaphor for COVID and coming back to life and regeneration. So he's thinking about environmental concerns as well as social concerns. You will see every painting in this show has mushrooms in it, and mushrooms are part of the life force in our ecosystem that kind of generates nutrients and lives off of things that are decaying and creates more life, basically, a sort of generative force in our forests. And Chris is thinking about that in terms of coming back to life after COVID as well. One of the great things he wrote about in his write-up for the show was that he'd gotten married during COVID to his wife Sarah, and he'd also got a dog. So he said they'd basically done all of the typical pandemic quarantine things that you're supposed to do, which is really sweet. I think they had a backyard wedding with maybe 20 people. This piece is called Network. This is kind of similar to some of the other pieces he's done before, where there's this really beautiful tangle in the background of these paintings. And I think Chris does a really great job of somehow managing to make the chaos of an actual landscape in the wilderness feel the way it feels, but somehow it's still kind of creating a clean painting that is satisfying. It doesn't really feel totally overwhelming, which I feel like some paintings I've seen where people are trying to paint in as many sticks and kind of this sort of detritus all over the base of a forest floor end up feeling really kind of muddy and messy. But his don't do that, and it's because he's so good at managing his contrast levels and kind of creating underpainting in his paintings that he's really in control of how the light and the dark works. This is the only pencil on paper piece in the show. It's very beautiful, and I don't think it's hard to give this one enough attention because the colors in the other pieces are so bright and compelling, but this is really beautifully rendered. And again, this is kind of a perfect example of what I'm talking about in terms of his contrast levels. He's really good at pulling light and dark in an image and manipulating where our eye goes and what we see. So he's got the lightest area kind of around this tree trunk, and that's what draws your eyes in, and then the subject is dark. So he's kind of making you look at that central figure in the way he's composing the piece. This one I really love too. What I really like about this painting is actually the background of it. How he's really made the fog and kind of inkiness of that atmosphere in the northwest in Oregon kind of feel like it feels. It feels damp, it feels rich and loamy. You can kind of feel that it's rained pretty recently in this image. All the colors are saturated like they would be in that space. He's actually based up in Portland in Oregon, so these are all from that wilderness where it really is like a different kind of vibrancy. I think in California, where I'm based, I've gotten so used to seeing drought colors, right, where things are much less saturated and our greens are yellow-green at this point, but not this kind of neon yellow-green, but a kind of faded, not enough water kind of green. So these paintings, being in a show in California, just feel like they have an explosive kind of color level, but this is actually what it looks like. I was just up at a wedding in Oregon and was kind of blown away walking around the forest and landscape and thinking about Chris's paintings and how accurate these color levels are. It's interesting to me because we kind of get used to whatever we see in our own landscape, and the palette is what informs us. as to what we think is sort of normal. Anyway, this is beautiful. One of the cool techniques that Chris uses when he's painting is he will take photographs of landscapes and he'll use them as source material. But then what he'll also do is take a clipping of something, like maybe this broadleaf maple, and then he'll actually have that clamped in his studio. So while he's painting this larger painting, he can actually refer back to an actual specimen. And there's a photograph of him in his studio doing that, which was really great and revealing to see. And again, I don't know what this mushroom is, but this very velvety purple pillow in this landscape is pretty wonderful. And Chris will do this really interesting thing where he is bringing colors in and painting that are very unnatural, like this purple throughout this bark. It's a really great example of kind of taking something that we think of real, right, but sort of bouncing around that light, so you get this great relationship between that mushroom on the lower left into the bark on the side of the painting on the right. This is the last painting of the show. This just looks so beautiful. I can imagine seeing a child running into this and hiding in that little space in there. It's a very lovely kind of wonderland in the forest. And again, as I mentioned, every single painting has mushrooms in it. The show is called Afterlife. This is the last week to see it. It closes on June 18th. And it is a very, very beautiful show. I'm very grateful that Chris brought all of these paintings here from Oregon and installed them. And we had a very sort of COVID-y opening where I had just had COVID and couldn't help him install. So we didn't get to spend enough time together as we usually have in previous shows, but hopefully his next one will spend a little more time together. Anyway, hope you can come and see the show, and if you can't, I hope this video helps you see the work a little more closely. They are really beautiful works.